What is up, guys? Welcome to the channel. Today we are reviewing the Incline hammer strength machine. In case you're new here, this is where I review through some exercises, give you my opinion on the equipment itself. We go through a little bit of anatomy and stuff and basically just help you make better decisions in the gym. Is this a good piece of equipment? In this case, if you're trying to get a huge chest. And what are some considerations? So if you're new here, I've got linked up here a video that kind of goes through like my little rating scale, what some of the categories are. But basically the short version is I'm going to give you kind of a light system at the end. I don't like the idea of completely good or completely bad. But towards the end, I would consider like a green light exercise good for almost everybody, barring you have some injury or who knows what. Really, really good decision all around. Yellow light means we're going to go through some considerations there. Maybe if someone has, more likely to disqualify people with certain shoulder stuff going on, or maybe there's just some better options if your gym has it available. And red light means you should pretty much only do that exercise if it's enjoyable for you and it is your sport, right? So if I had somebody say, hey, I want to get big quads, I would probably not recommend doing any like Olympic lifting. It's not that you can't grow your quads a little bit from that, but on paper, there's literally 1,000 other exercises I would probably do first. That being said, if you enjoy Olympic lifting, it's fun for you, have at it. But especially if you're a trainer, really no business prescribing, snatches or clean and jerks for big quads, in my opinion. So let's move on. Hey, Urs is going to donate himself for this a little bit. So first, getting a little bit into anatomy. Again, this isn't an anatomy video, but the reality is exercises are tools that are built for a training goal. The training goal should always come back to a muscle and what joint does it influence. Again, of course, we've got some shoulders, some triceps involved, but 99% of people using this machine want big old pecs. So I'm going to give you a couple anatomy things here that are just helpful, some form considerations, and a couple little things maybe you haven't exactly heard before. So pretty much all everything being the same on any chest exercise, having a bigger arch is going to be better. If nothing else, it's going to create more length change, especially in the bottom. And then for most of your pecs, it will give them a little bit more of a mechanical advantage in that position as well too. I always say, people ask me a whole lot these days about what your scapular shoulder blades should do. My super simple version is in the bottom, you want to feel like they're retracted. So a good cue when you're warming up is feel like you're rowing into the bottom, whether it's a press, fly. I think that's overall good advice. If you're doing a press, a relatively short range of motion, especially if you just stay in that lengthened position, because that's what all the kids are doing these days, you can probably keep them pretty retracted and relatively still the whole time. As you go through more range of motion, you probably want to just let them naturally move more. But that's probably the biggest thing, let them naturally move. But what that will look like is in presses, less motion, in flies, more motion. And then we're going to talk a lot about upper arm path specifically to this machine. For the most part, anywhere from a tucked almost all the way up to this high 90 position can work for someone. But there's going to be some things I'm going to talk about a little bit different on this, especially considering this is a converging machine, that you might want to consider the more tucked you go. And we're going to get my buddy out in a minute. If you're new here, you're going to see who my buddy is. But basically, this tuck position, I think, can work well for all parts of your pec, especially in the stretch position. As you go through and actually contract the pecs and get pretty much to your body and start to go past your body, then the plane of motion you're working in only really lines up well for those kind of upper pec fibers, those clavicular pec fibers. So again, in the stretch position, can really get every single part of your pec, but as you come across your body, and this should visibly make sense, those lower pec fibers, particularly even the sternal fibers to a certain degree, actually start to want to pull across your body. So again, when they wrap around your ribs, they're all going to pull your upper arm this way. But if you're going to go through a full range of motion like on this machine and actually bring your upper arm pretty far across your body, I recommend probably not really tucked, probably staying more in a slot of what I would call about 60 to 80 degrees of abduction. And we'll look at some video of that in a minute. But I'm going to get my buddy out. We named him. I didn't name him. And I will tag the user. Come on out, buddy. Jerry Speinfeld. So that's the name we're going with, is Jerry Speinfeld. So Jerry for short. So later videos, if I call him Jerry, you OGs will know that his last name is Speinfeld, and that's why the name is Jerry. But I'm going to try and do this without his arm ripping off, because this was happening a little bit of me trying to demo this with the bands here. But so you guys should all see when we're up in this high plane, at any point in time as we're going through kind of pure horizontal abduction and adduction, again, don't overcomplicate muscles. You can see these all, again, if we're going to just kind of break up, obviously it's all filled in pec here, as you can kind of see with this picture up here. Obviously everything from clavicular fibers kind of at the top to you have your ones that attach more costal here, more towards the ribs, and everything in the sternum in the middle. So if we're just really kind of looking at the parameters, kind of breaking into three main chunks of your pec, that's what I have visualized with these three bands here. But as we go into horizontal abduction, you should see that they all stretch. And as you go into pure horizontal adduction, they pretty much all shorten. You can even see this guy right here in the middle really shortening, which makes sense. If we're going from this point to this point in this plane, this one's going to shorten the most and these ones to a smaller degree. So what you can't see from the front alone is if you have this tuck position, we'll go here, you should be able to see as I go back in this position, all three parts stretch. So that's what I say, where a tuck position out of this stretch position can work all three very well, because you can see literally clavicular, sternal, and these costal lower fibers all lengthening. And as you continue to bring that upper arm forward, they shorten, shorten, shorten. Now what you lose here, and you can kind of see from the side, is it should make sense, is this arm keeps coming this way. This one's no longer going to continue to shorten. This one will a little bit, and this one will really be the only one that's still in plane to fully shorten. So you see as I bring this up, what's happening here? So this is still shortening, this is still shortening, and then now we can see when we get that point, you can actually see these fibers starting to lengthen again. So hopefully that visual makes sense. If we look from the front in this plane, this is still perfectly in plane here to go from the most length change to the most shortened. This is still shortened, you can see it's still relaxing. And this one, as it goes from stretched, that's about as short as it gets, and it should make sense if I just pull these 2 points together, it starts to want to bring your upper arm this way. We're kind of going in the opposite direction. So when we're doing this machine, instead of having that, if you still want a significant length change in all of them, I recommend being a little bit more abducted. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. So for a lot of presses, you know, very tucked can be great, especially in the stretch, especially if you're just really trying to bias this fiber here, it stays in plane the whole time. But if you're trying to get some overall pec development, even on an incline type motion, then being up here is going to be a little bit of a better option, hopefully, for what I just diagrammed for you. Thank you so much, Jerry. You go over here, and let's see what we've got next. I think we got some cool video. So let's see what we've got in this cool video. So I've got a couple guys. So what is the upper arm position look like? I'm just going to roll through this real quick. So I've got Jay here. You guys heard him? So if we're looking here, let's get him more at the bottom. And we're going to get a rough estimate. We're going to get a rough estimate of basically, when I'm talking an angle, you know, we'll call that basically upper arm relative to torso. I mean, all that really matters is deep what's going on technically at that actual GH joint, the shoulder joint, but this is a good frame of reference. So I would consider this, if we're looking at this angle here, probably about 60-ish. As we go upwards, we're going to call that getting bigger, where up here would be 90-ish, right? So that's kind of a visual of what I mean with a little bit more of a tucked position. And then we'll go on to the next guy. What do we see here? This guy looks pretty familiar, and we see a similar type thing going on here. So both of these are just good examples that I want to give that are probably a pretty good example of around 60-ish degrees tucked. And then if we want to take up where I showed that I feel you can even go higher, some people tend to vilify this position, but we got Urs here, and he is almost close to 90, much more of like this high elbow position, like that angle there. Obviously we would call this probably right there is 90, you know, so he's maybe just 10 degrees off of it or so. But the reality is all of these positions are going to be very good for getting a lot of pec fiber, and I would argue as you go up higher, you can actually incorporate a little bit more lower pec as well too, because obviously you can do this line straight across the joint and see where it probably lines up the best with. But if you've got stuff wanting to pull an upper arm this way, everything's going to work together. So if these can still shorten, which they will shorten. And if these can still shorten to contribute, they will. So these kind of work together to pull in this direction, kind of having that little bit of a resultant thing. So really the only thing that should determine which one, again, as you go a little bit higher, yes, I'd say you have a little bit more overall pec. But the bigger thing you should go with here is what feels the best from a joint standpoint. So again, a lot of people do feel a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more tucked. Then don't try this position if it feels bad. Don't force it. That being said, some people have been, again, this idea of this very high elbow position is bad for you. I get the notion of basically your humerus, the head of the humerus, steps right up in top and kind of can press in that subacromial space. All that stuff that goes through that space can get impinged. But everyone's structure is a little bit different. How do you know? Literally go by feel. Don't let somebody else tell you. If you can go up here where Urs is and it feels great and that's your best position, have at it. So that should be your little, the factors, that's the range we're looking at for upper arm positions. What's some unique considerations here? Really, I always just tell people for this machine, figure out your arm path first. Don't sit down, you know, figure out, obviously just messing around, you can go here. If you get up here, it doesn't feel good, don't go here. If you get down here and it feels good, this is probably a great place to go. So literally pull your hands into your bottom position and then sit down on the seat and see how you need to adjust. If your hands are below the handles, Obviously move the seat up just a little bit till you're at just the right height. If you sit down and your hands are above where you put them already that feels best for you, drop the seat down a little bit till you line up. So find your position first. Most people mess up their shoulders, or a lot of people mess up their shoulders or take away from their pec because they just hop in and kind of wherever the machine is, they kind of ballpark it, match the machine to you, not the other way around. And then the one thing that you're gonna get here, I think I'm gonna draw this if you have to imagine from a side view here. So this is the start position and this is the end position of the handle, right? So we're flipping the whole thing on the side. So what happens as you go from the bottom, you're pressing this direction, and then at the top, the arc is going more this direction. So it might not be quite that dramatic, but it's pretty close. And so if you look conversely, at the bottom, the machine is pressing this way. At the top, the machine is pressing more this way. So just the fact that that line of force, that direction of force is changing a little bit through the range of motion can make some positions feel more comfortable than others or less comfortable than others, depending on how you look at it. So even if you find this little bottom position, I find one of the downsides of this machine from an alignment standpoint is that arc can make it a little bit uncomfortable for some people, and sometimes just some range of motion. So I say play around with it. Even if you found, hey, this is the perfect position for your hand to start, if it feels a little bit uncomfortable, well, let's try half an inch up. Let's try half an inch down. And again, because of that arc, you might be able to find a little bit more comfortable of a position. So that's the first good gauge, then the second good gauge. And then another thing could potentially be adjusting the range of motion, which we'll talk about in a minute. So next one, what do we got? Do we go through everybody I got here? Where we got right alignment. We got profiles. It is surprisingly hard to find a good side view of this machine. This was the best one that I could get. So profiles, this one's a little bit different. We're talking actually the weight in your hand here. Machines that are plate loaded are a little bit tricky. A lot of people don't think about it a whole lot. But we want to look about where the line of force is relative to the axis of the machine. So that will actually change the weight in your hand. We're not talking about even how that weight expresses at a joint. Although the moment arm is, again, from that weight to your joint, don't change through the range of motion. It's not like a dumbbell that stacks. That's a longer video. Make your head hurt thinking about that one. But if we look at the line of force here, and we go down here, and we say, where is that line of force relative to the axis? So we say the axis is probably right about here. We'll go, that is the distance. That's the moment arm. So this will be the thing that basically determines how much load is in your hand. If that is longer, it is basically multiplied by the weight because we're using gravity here. So this is the line of force from the weight. And again, the further it is from that, the longer the moment arm, the more joint torque at the machine, the more weight in your hand. And as we drop down the bottom, whoop, there's Jay, sorry Jay. What happens here? So we do a line of force here. It makes my head hurt to keep these the same color. So I'm gonna change colors here. Let's do this, bear with me. And so we'll draw the new moment arm in blue. This is the new moment arm here, roughly. They'll be right over top of each other pretty much. So we don't have to know the exact numbers. But what does this mean? What do we know? Well, we know that this means the machine is lighter at the bottom. Literally, if I took a little mini scale and pressed it here, it would be a lighter weight here than when I pressed it in up here. And this actually isn't even as dramatic because imagine I'm not perfectly from the side. The length change would actually be more different if I was directly from the side. So sometimes, depending on where you measure it, the range of motion the person goes through their arm length, it's almost twice the distance, meaning the machine is twice as heavy at the top. Why is that probably not a good thing? One, you're stronger in that length in the mid-range. You can produce more intramuscular force in that length in mid-range. And there's a whole bunch of research right now that seems to indicate that the length in mid-range is probably the most important range of motion to be biasing or to be training. So if you're going through this machine and you pick a weight, the limiting factor will generally always be the top. So meaning you'll fail here when you have a ton more down here. In reality, if we had a way that someone that was intelligent designed a machine actually designed this to do, we'd want the opposite thing to happen. We'd want it heaviest at the bottom and lighter at the top. And so hammer strength, basically just design things by let's put some plates on and see what kind of makes sense. Not really any working backwards from how the human body works or how mechanics work. Just really slapping some plates on there and doing what they can do. And sometimes stuff is good and sometimes stuff is completely crap. So let's minimize this. If we're looking at plates relative to axis, we're looking at the profile. And again, if you guys are new here, we're looking at, what type of profile do we have? What is that loading pattern? The loading pattern here, I give a rating of trash. It's the exact opposite of what you would want. So again, does that mean we have to throw this machine in the garbage because not everyone in the gym has a better machine? No. What's some good strategies that you could do here? And this is something that, again, if we look at what meatheads have done since the beginning of time, and by beginning of time, I mean when these machines were invented, you could stick within the range of motion where it's more effective. So instead of getting to this limiting factor, So if hypothetically someone could do 3 plates and get all the way up here and they stop the set when they can't get up here, if they did 3.5 plates or 4 plates, they might be able to do the same rep range in a shorter range of motion. So you're matching the load, again, to those positions that you're staying in. And so let's see what we got here. What have some meatheads done? Look how Jay does this. I wonder if there's a reason why Jay does this. Look how Urs does this. He comes up a little bit higher, but still pretty short of lockout. And let's watch how he finishes a set as he starts to get to failure. Shorter range of motion, shorter range of motion, and same thing for Chris. Well short of lockout, really staying just in that bottom position. Justin Compton, ginormous freak of nature. His entire set just in that bottom half. And these guys knew how to do this without me even drawing any stupid pictures on anything. But I just want to give you guys an idea of, again, some things that can be relatively intuitive and some good strategies for this. So if I had a converging machine, now there's some people that think the shortened range of a muscle, and that's what a converging machine does, is it takes you all the way basically into that shortened position. Some people think it's a complete waste to train that. I don't think it's a waste. I think it makes way more sense to prioritize the lengthened and mid ranges of muscles. So if I had a machine that was heaviest here and lightest here, I would probably recommend going through the full range of motion, because you're still essentially prioritizing by overloading where you're stronger and muscles can grow the most. And we have plenty of research, obviously, that shows muscles can grow from that fully shortened position. It just seems like they probably can't grow as much. So if you're stuck with the hammer strength in your gym, actually I'll save that to the very end. So let's look at my next category here: bracing, stability, complexity, and we'll put accessibility in there as well too. This means basically, one, bracing is how hard do you have something to push into in direct opposition to the load. So that's really what bracing truly means. So we have the load going this way. Give me a pen. Pen. You can do it. There we go. So the load is going this way. Do we have something back there to push in direct opposition to? Yes, it's called a pad. So for however hard Chris is pushing, I don't care how strong Chris is, if he's pushing a bajillion pounds, he's going to get a bajillion pounds back from this back pad unless he actually breaks the machine and the back pad crashes. And so what does that mean? Well, as opposed to one of the dumber exercises that people do, if you did this with cables and we're trying to do this Spider-Man balancing thing, if you're actually strong and using a lot of weight, there it becomes more of a balancing thing. You don't have something to push as hard into. I don't care who you are. It will limit the load that you can actually use with your chest. This is near perfect or pretty much perfect bracing because, again, there's no limit in load as long as that back pad stays assembled. Stability, complexity, it's a fixed path. So again, it's low stability or high stability, low complexity, which again, all of that is great for hypertrophy. The handles are independent, but doesn't really make a difference. It's not really more of a complexity issue. It may just highlight if you have side to side imbalances, but because it's a fixed path, again, there's not really anything to juggle or balance as far as trying to keep that in position. And I always put accessibility in here as an idea as well too, is like, how accessible is this? Pretty accessible. I mean, good or bad, depending on how you look at it. Hammer strength is in most gyms, especially most meathead gyms, so accessibility is relatively high. Let's get into the overall ranking here. I gotta get rid of my arrows. So if I'm going through the categories that we went through, alignment's pretty darn good. You know, I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10 because obviously, like I said, there's a little bit of a slot there because of the arc, but most people can tend to make this work. That being said, it's a 7 out of 10 because someone watching this is like, man, it feels like crap everywhere that I go, every time I do it. Don't do it. There's a whole lot of better exercises you could do or other exercise you have. The profile, I just feel bad giving a 1 out of 10, but it's close to a 1 out of 10, meaning the loading pattern, heaviest where you're weakest and muscles probably respond the least from an actual stimulus standpoint for growing, and lighter where you're actually stronger and you want more stimulus. So because it's the inverse, we're going to give that a 2. Bracing, stability, complexity, or low complexity, we're going to give that a near 9 out of 10, pretty much perfect. Accessibility, we're going to give it a 7 out of 10. Again, most gyms have it. Now, again, when I go accessibility and all that kind of stuff, what would be better? So my overall recommendation, I think it maybe stopped on red. I can't tell, but I'm going to give this a, man, I did this again. Give me a pen. Technology. You betrayed me. There we go. So I'm going to give it a yellowish green. So I'm going to go somewhere kind of in the middle. So when I put all that together, it's still a good option, right? The simple fix for the worst part of it is stay in the range of motion and pick a load with a partial range of motion. Now, the only downside of that partial range of motion that is worth considering and being aware of at least is it can make standardizing reps a little bit trickier, right? So again, if you're trying to progress over time, it might be tough if like you're just every single time you get heavier, you're just cutting off a little bit more and a little bit more range of motion. So whatever you pick You want to try and stick with that as close as you can as you're still progressing it over time. And going to lockout can make that a little bit easier because it's a little bit more definitive. But if we want to stay, and again, fix the kind of bad profile, I would just say basically go with either partial range of motion and or partial range of motion to finish. So even if you did fully fatigue and you want to go all the way up here, then you could always finish with some partials to get more tax in the length where you can produce more force as well still. So again, overall, it's available at lots of gyms, pretty good piece. I'm going to give it a yellowish green rating, not a bad exercise. So why wouldn't I give a green? What would I give a green? A prime incline would be actually a much better option. So prime Strive originally, prime now owns, because it's very easy. It's one of the few plate loaded things that you can actually load to be the heaviest in the lengthened position and get lighter in the short position. And that's why I recommend if you're doing that exercise, you can still go full range of motion while having load that matches probably your priority of where your force production is and appearance of strength is. So that's my overall rating of this exercise. Trying to go through that relatively detailed and quick. Give me your guys' feedback in the captions down below if you have any more questions specifically about this. And if you have more exercises you want to see, I've got a list. So this was one of the top ones, actually, surprisingly, coming off of the last review that we did. If you haven't seen that one, we'll link it somewhere, kind of towards the end, maybe as recommendations here as well. But if you want to see other exercises, again, I've got a couple planned and coming, but get down in that comment section. Tell me what you want to see me review, break down, do the same deal with. And if you get down in there and you see something you want to see as well, give it a little thumbs up or heart or whatever's down there, because I'll know whichever one gets the most votes will be the ones that we do next. As always, please do the YouTube thing. Like, subscribe, share with a friend that needs bigger pecs. And if you're looking for good programs, want to support the channel, check down the link below. I've got my app, got some merch. And till the next one, hope you guys enjoy.